Huh?
Yo! Be a cool dude and subscribe to the Geek Legion of Doom!
Josh Funk directs and co-writes The Fuzzies, a 2025 horror comedy movie based on a short film of the same name. I believe the short film was a 2021 release. So The Fuzzies, this is a kind of supernatural children's toys coming to life style movie, but not really like Chucky or Annabelle. It's more along the lines of Benny Was Here, I suppose you could say. So what's the story? So we have a reunion of some childhood friends who are gathered together because their once childhood friend has now passed away, and this woman who has passed away went on to become a popular children's TV show host with a kind of show that had lots of puppets and kind of like fun things and stuff like that. And she's passed away, and in her will she has left this house in the kind of the middle of the woods, and she's asked them to find this particular doll called Sunny, who was the kind of the main sort of doll character in the show. And we have these now three friends, now adults, go to this kind of house which is all decorated in kind of like primary colours, and there's lots of kind of like strange paraphernalia all over it. But there's something sinister possibly going on there, something supernatural. The movie takes place, I think, in the early 80s, although it doesn't really specify. So there's no calling for help on mobile phones. What will happen? You'll have to watch the movie and find out. So let's talk about The Fuzzies. What works in this movie's favour? Now, this is a strange, off-kilter, eerie movie in some ways. I have seen some critiques saying it's not particularly horrific, and that's true. It's not gory, or there's not really any sort of genuine sort of scares in this movie. But what I think this movie does have is this strange, unsettling feeling, because everything is kind of so rainbow coloured, and all the sort of the decor in this house is so cartoonish, and even our kind of like puppets and weird goings on are all as they are like these felt Muppet style characters. They're not scary to look at necessarily, but because they're kind of like being a little unnatural, should we call it, and moving around and doing things that they shouldn't be doing, it has this off-kilter, eerie atmosphere. The movie's also not in any rush to kind of get to any big set pieces, so it has this sort of slow build up. Now, again, you might say it's a little bit on the slow and boring side, but I do think the movie, in its favour, just adds this kind of growing feeling of that, you know, at some point there's going to be some type of pop to this balloon, so to speak. There's going to be this kind of waterfall of weirdness which is going to come out of this film, and you just get before then you get a slow drip feed of you know, things happening in the background or slightly obscured, where you can, you know, we are as the audience are sort of seeing what's going on, but the characters are not. And as such, we as the audience know that there's something not right here. There is clearly some type of supernatural element involved, and you know, I gotta say, as I say, it definitely has a sort of strange, unsettling feel to it that I quite enjoyed. Now, the film primarily has three characters, these three friends. There was a smattering of other characters, but they play it fairly straight. And when you juxtapose that with the kind of the absurdness of what's kind of going on around them, because there are some very strange and bizarre sequences in this movie. I think it works in a way because they're so separate from almost the madness which is kind of going on, and because these characters are all played pretty straight, you know, it really feels at odds when you have these kind of like these puppets interacting with them and stuff like that. And you know, again, it adds to, I would say it does add to that sort of that strange feeling that this movie kind of exudes. So I quite enjoyed it, and I actually quite enjoyed the pace of it. I mean, you know, I think this movie, again, I've mentioned this a few times in reviews. At about halfway through the movie, I always, as a little test of myself, I always ask myself, like, do I understand at this point, halfway through, what the movie's trying to do? And I do, and I think the movie does a good job. Even though it's a slower film, I think it's still taking you on that journey, and you're still intrigued to find out where it's going to end, because you don't really know. You don't quite know what's kind of going on. But you get the idea that these friends are a little clueless about what's kind of going on, but there is clearly paranormal stuff afoot here. And, you know, the gradual realisation that their deceased friend may have been into some weirder stuff is dawning on these trio of friends. And again, I quite enjoyed that story. So I think the movie does take you on this sort of ride with it. So, you know, and then the finale is a little more, in the traditional sense, a horror movie in some respects. But even then, when we have our, and I'll use kind of air quotes to say, gory scenes, for example, there's a scene where a character his hand is chopped off, and then he's kind of chopped in half. But because we're dealing with puppets and stuff, it's done in a way where the effects are done in like a kind of like fuzzy felt sort of style way, and the gore is done in a kind of like puppet, you know, felt kind of like gore. So it's not really gory. And then the actual effects themselves, many are kind of like hand puppets, but there's also sort of stop motion and things like that. So it has this kind of retro feel. And obviously this is a movie presumably taking place in like the early 80s, but by that you would say that the original TV shows were probably in the late 70s and things like this. So, you know, it has this definite kind of like a vintage or retro feel to it, which again you can quite enjoy. And I gotta say, I think that the hair and makeup and the kind of all that sort of stuff, you know, the 80s regalia, I think it looks pretty good. So what doesn't work in this movie's favour? Now, we've talked about the kind of the our tone, this kind of mix of this kind of bizarre, surreal and weird stuff kind of going on, but our characters being played quite straight. But I gotta say, I think the acting isn't perfect. And I gotta say, some of the performances don't seem particularly strong. I think this movie would have been more dramatic had I think some of the acting choices been a little bit. If they had even dialed into a little bit more like dramatic acting, and the performance had been a little stronger. Because the feeling is that they're trying to have these characters play it straight, but the acting just isn't quite. You know, it's not terrible by any means, but it's just not quite as believable as you might want, and therefore I think some of the effects are a little lost, because some of the kind of the line delivery seems a little stilted and wooden at times, you know, and then when you offset that against the kind of the weird campy sort of like background and stuff, again some of the effect is not as good as it could have been. I think the pacing will put some people off. I mean, there is a lot of kind of sitting around in this kind of weird house talking to one another, and you sometimes feel maybe this movie relies a little bit too heavily on exposition. There are some kind of weird, bizarre scenes that veer very much into the surreal, and at times you won't really know what's going on. So this movie, it might be a little kind of like odd and confusing. I mean, it's designed to be that way. But, you know, it is, you're thinking, what the hell am I watching sometimes? Because it looks like, you know, if you've been eating candy and then vomited up, and that's kind of what you're looking at. It's kind of like a strange movie in some of its kind of sequences. I mean, some of them are meant to be like dream sequences or hallucinations and things, but, you know, again, it's sometimes I think it veers possibly into a little bit of the surreal that might put people off. Some of the supporting characters, I think that more could have been done with them. I think to kind of balance out the story a little more. There's like a mailman, and then we have like this lawyer or solicitor at the beginning. And again, I think the movie needed to kind of anchor itself a little bit more to have some other characters and more kind of bit more human interaction and stuff. And I guess you would say, obviously, you kind of get the idea about what's going on, but again, it might leave you a little frustrated in regards to you don't really know what the hell is going on in this movie. It's supernatural stuff, and you know there is clearly a presence which has been created, possibly, but again, we don't really know about. It doesn't really give you all the answers, so don't be expecting that. And so some of the choices here, I think, for example, when we do have our sort of sequences where characters are come to harm, again, maybe it would have benefited them to actually lean into a little bit more of the kind of the actual gore, rather than having when a human character is killed, rather than having them turn into sort of a quasi puppet, is to actually see that, you know, we have a cartoon character killing a human, and then the actual kind of like harm that it's caused, rather than kind of making them, you know, bleed out in string and things like this, which I think loses some of the impact. And I get why they did it, but and again, that juxtaposition I think was a little lost there. Yeah, so I gotta say though, I actually quite enjoyed this movie, and I had a lot of fun with it, and I think it's like one of these films where, you know, the writer-director, Joss Funk, you know, he clearly had a vision about what he wanted to do. Obviously, he had a short film, and this is it. So I kind of see what he was going with it, and I quite enjoyed the vision. There's a few changes I think would have made this movie a little better, but for the most part, I would give this an above-average movie. But I do understand it's not for everyone. It's certainly not a scary movie in the traditional sense. So it's 6 out of 10 for me. Have you seen it? What were your thoughts? Leave me comments, and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.
My name is Jimmy Smits, and you've got the shits.